muito boa tarde a todos os que estão aqui em sala e os que acompanham esta conferência online, esta sessão de hoje no âmbito do ciclo de debates. And I'll be switching to English. Just a few brief words to welcome the ambassador of Israel ambassador here at the Universidade Aberta, which is the public distance university in Portugal. It's a great pleasure to have you here to participate on this discussion forum that it's part of the activities of the Centro de Estudos Globais, which is a research center on global studies. And the theme today, it's going to be about the greater Middle East. This is just a very short introduction, brief words, and I will leave the floor to the ones that are more entitled to discuss this theme than myself. Thank you.
Magnífica reitora, senhores convidados e membros do público, obrigado a todos. Excepcionalmente vou prosseguir em inglês. Good evening and welcome all to this roundtable of the Global Studies Center of the Open University on the Greater Middle East, today in English. If in the Q&A after the roundtable someone wishes to ask a question in Portuguese, I will translate it. I will only ask you to use the ability through chat in Zoom to place your question by writing. Today, March 21st, is the start of the new year in Persia. Also just a few days before the holy month of Ramadan begins. And unfortunately, is also almost a month since the conflict rages in Europe. But this roundtable being held now is an illustration of the spirit of this cycle. We intend to discuss relevant matters that may be overwhelmed occasionally by current events, and the Greater Middle East is much more than just a regional reality. It carries a global significance that we hope this session will make clear. Today, we are honored to have with us His Excellency Dor Shapira, Ambassador of Israel to Portugal, who has joined a diplomatic mission in Lisbon last year. The ambassador is with us at a time when Israel is actively engaging in mediating peace in Europe, as well as building new ties in the Middle East, like recently it was made public concerning Turkey. Also, he is knowledgeable of the Abraham Accords, and we hope to have an opportunity to discuss all these matters. Also with us, Professor Armando Marques Guedes of the Law School of the University of Lisbon, known to many as a political commentator of international affairs in the Portuguese media, and who has in his long CV a direct responsibility in foreign affairs as a director of the Portuguese Diplomatic Institute years ago. Yes.
And policy planning director.
Yes. Finally, the Associate Dean of the Open University, Professor João Caetano, also a media commentator on Portuguese politics, whose insight in cooperation and the Portuguese practice on that field will provide context to this debate. Context is in fact the key issue, as the current crisis in Ukraine not only calls upon other regions, like recently we've seen the involvement of Turkey and Israel in mediating efforts, but also allows and calls for realignments in other geographies that we see already taking place when President Assad visits the UAE or when Iran strikes Iraqi Kurdistan in Erbil. However, I have taken already too much of your time, and now I will give the floor to Ambassador Dor Shapira. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here in the Open University, and I thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today. I understand, as I was asked, this conference is about the changes and developments in the Middle East, and I would say 3 comments on that. But before that, I don't think we can begin any kind of conference when we talk about international affairs without referring to what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. So it's not in the Middle East, but somehow Israel found itself involved also in that. And I will say 3 short things about Russia and Ukraine. Number 1, I don't think, and I think it's important, very important to emphasize it and to explain it, there isn't even a question where Israel stands when it comes to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Israel support Ukraine. We are opposing the Russian aggression. We said it, our foreign minister said it, our prime minister said it. We voted against the Russia aggression in the UN. We co-sponsored this resolution, and we're doing whatever we can in order to assist Ukraine with the limitations that we have. So I think it's very important to put it on the table and to explain. I don't think there is any question where Israel stands morally, but also strategically when it comes to our friends and allies, the US, the EU, and the rest of the Western world. Number two, we will do whatever we can to assist Ukraine, as I said, with the limitations that we have. And as of tomorrow, Israel is going to be the first country to open a military field hospital inside Ukraine. So we're going to have around 60 Israeli doctors and nurses inside Ukraine, 15 kilometers from the borders in Poland, operating a field hospital, a field military hospital, in order to assist people from Ukraine that will get, that are injured and that will be coming to this hospital. I don't know any other country who has field hospital inside Ukraine beside Israel as of tomorrow. And we'll continue to put, as we speak to you right now, we have around 160 diplomats from the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the border with Ukraine, with Romania, with Poland, Slovakia, and other places in order to assist and evacuate Israeli people from Ukraine and people from the Jewish community and other refugees to help them to come to Israel and to assist them on the first steps after they've been forced to leave their house. So we will continue doing that, and we have lots of Israeli NGOs also on those borders trying to help all those people from the Ukrainian side, and we'll continue to do that. And the third thing I will say about Ukraine, Russia, is the issue of Israel finding itself at this strange role of being the mediators. It's not a role that we are used to, but it's very interesting. I think the reason we found ourselves in this situation, and if there will be interest, we can talk about it later, what are the reasons? But at the end of the day, there are very few countries today around the world, from the Western world, that can actually speak with Moscow and can speak with Kiev. And Israel is one of those very few countries. So although President Putin knows exactly where we stand and that we support, and everything that I've already said, he knows that exactly, still he understands that he can speak with us and we can be one of those who are delivering the messages from both sides. And I don't know if the chances are high. I don't know if there is, if there is a risk by doing that. But as my prime minister said, and my foreign minister said, if there is a slight chance that this war will end even a week earlier than it's supposed to end by doing those talks and mediating between the sides, then it's not even a question. It's our moral duty to do whatever we can in order to assist in solving the problem and ending this conflict. And we will continue doing that with all the criticism that sometimes it will bring upon that, because I think we owe it to the Ukrainians, we owe it to the world, and that's why we'll continue doing that. And hopefully we'll be able to succeed, and this conflict will end soon. So that's in regards to Ukraine. Now we can talk about the Middle East. Regarding the Middle East, and I will try not to take too much time, I'll do it very, very short, and if there is, after that, if we'll have any questions, I can go in details in some of the subjects, so I'll do it more like headlines. I think there are three stories going on in the Middle East today. One is a very negative one is a very positive one, and one is in the middle. As a good Jew, I will start with the negative. The negative one is the issue of a country in the Middle East that is doing everything it can in order to keep the area and even the world being unstable. And that's the issue of Iran. And I think the idea that Iran is continue deceiving the world and continue to its own race in order to achieve and to get a nuclear weapon, that's something that should worry not Israel and not the countries in the Middle East. It should worry the whole world. Iran wanting to have ICBM, which, if there is anyone who doesn't know what is ICBM, it's intercontinental ballistic missiles. As much as I know, Iran and Israel are in the same continent. So if they want this kind of missiles, it's not against Israel. So that's why I think we need to do whatever we can in order to stop their intention from having a weapon which will be very dangerous. This regime is involved in everything which is bad today around the world. They are involved in Syria. They're supporting a terror organization that took over Lebanon, Hezbollah. They're supporting a terror organization that took over Gaza, the Hamas. They're supporting terror groups, proxies, all around the world. Only 2 days ago, we commemorated 30 years for the terror attack that took place in Buenos Aires. An Israeli embassy was bombed and 29 people were found dead, were killed because of that, murdered. And the CIA already had a report in 2001 stating that Iran is behind this terror attack. Hezbollah was the proxy and they are the one funding him. So they're involved in everything which is bad around the world. And I think the international community needs to pick the right side also on this case and do whatever it can in order to stop them, and for sure to make sure that they will never be able to achieve a nuclear weapon. So that's on the negative side. On the positive side, I think there was a real change happening in the Middle East in the last year and a half, and that's something which I don't think it got enough attention in Europe. And I must say, I'm quite surprised and I can't understand why. Israel, in the last year and a half, signed peace agreement with 4 Arab countries, with United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Morocco, and some kind of initial agreement with Sudan. That's a strategic change in the region. That's a big deal. And that's something which I think should get much more support from the international community and much more support from Europe. I learned when I came here that Rabat is the closest city to Lisbon, capital city to Lisbon. So I think Portugal should be very involved and very happy that Israel, which is an important partner of Portugal, signed a peace agreement with Morocco, which is a very important partner of Portugal. And if you will look in the last year and a half, what happened around the region in this year and a half since those peace agreements were signed, it's amazing to see what's happened. Israel and United Arab Emirates, in 1 year, we have almost $1.5 billion trade in 1 year. We have direct flights between Israel and Bahrain, and between Israel and United Arab Emirates, and between Israel and Morocco, which are talking about hundreds of thousands of tourists from both sides going to visit in this, since those agreements were signed. We have embassies that were opened in Abu Dhabi, a consulate in Dubai, embassies in Rabat and in Manama. And of course, they all also opened the embassies in Israel. This is an amazing change. First of all, it's a change that sends some signal to the world and to the region to understand how the things should be the element of power should be divided in the region. But also it shows you that this peace agreement was made for the people and is actually giving so much for the people. We've been able in this last year sign agreement on energy. We signed almost 60 side agreements between Israel and Bahrain, Israel, United Arab Emirates, on energy, on medical, on communication, on every field that you can think that is to give the people of those countries. We've been able to sign agreement and to go forward with programs that will actually bring good for the people of Israel and the people of those countries that we signed those agreements with. So it's a huge change. And by the way, those who are telling to me, yeah, but you know, it was President Trump who was behind it, or Benjamin Netanyahu, those two people are not in the picture anymore. And those agreements are still there and are still very strong. So first of all, I think we should thank those people who were behind the agreement. You can like them or not, but at the end of the day, the leaders are the ones who are pushing for those agreements. And of course, those from the Emirati and the Bahraini and the Moroccan side. But secondly, you see that those agreements are now in the hands, not of the leaders, but in the hands of the people. And that's something that we should all be praising and pushing in order to achieve much more agreements around the world between Israel and its neighbors. So that's on the most positive side. In the middle, we have the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think that what we are focusing right now is something that both sides realize that we have to do, and that building back the trust between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Israeli foreign minister came up with a plan few months ago about security for economic, and we're doing whatever we can in order to assist the Palestinians to build back their economy. And today you have much more Palestinians entering Israel every day in order to work inside Israel. And we are trying to help them to build back their own everything, their economy, and also on the medical issues, we're working together. And I think it's working because you see more and more trust being built between the two sides. The problem is that we are working with the Palestinian Authority, which they are the legitimate leaders of the Palestinians. But still in Gaza, you have a terror organization that took over the people, took over the land. That's a Hamas. And to work with them, it's of course impossible. And this is a challenge that we still need to go. But I think that's for the next few years. I don't think we need to, or the next few weeks, we don't need to speak about how we solve the issue of the Israeli Palestinians, but to speak more about how we keep building the trust step by step in order to get to the right point between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So that's like on a nutshell where we stand right now. And as I said before, I'll be able to elaborate about any subject according to where we'll continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I will now give the floor to Professor Marques Guedes.
Professor Marques Guedes, myself, I was very happy to hear the ambassador, and I subscribe 100% what the ambassador said, of course. So again, let me begin as you did, Ambassador Shapira. Let me begin with the case of Ukraine. I mentioned this to you before this took place. I'm very happy to know that a field hospital is being set in Ukraine. I have no doubt in my mind, yesterday on television, 3 days, 2 days, 4 days ago, 2 weeks ago, I said, I hope Israel will be the mediator because Israel deserves it, and because of the equidistance that Israel has, rhetorical equidistance, because it took a very clear position, not only in the UN, but in other fora, by supporting Ukraine and by condemning the Russian invasion. Let's call it what it is, which is what Israel did. And it's good that the world knows this, because lurking behind there's always a kind of deep suspicion in relation to Israel, which I find bad, really bad, very, very unfair. Israel, after all, and I shall come back to this, in that part of the world that we used to call the Levant, because this is where the sun rises from the European perspective. Then we started calling the Middle East, because it was east of us in Europe. And then the Americans came up with the notion of Greater Middle East, which was used here. I actually published a book in the Portuguese military 2 years ago, 2 volumes, with officers writing the chapters. I set up what the titles of the chapters and what the indexes were, and it was their job to do this. And I called it the enlarged the wider Greater Middle East, because I think the wider Greater Middle East is now the actual player. It goes all the way to Central Asia, to what used to be the soft belly of the Soviet Union, all the way into China, into Xinjiang, with the Uyghur, of course, being so mistreated by the Chinese in China. I'm saying this, not you, Ambassador. I can say this. I think you would have diplomatic trouble if you did. It also goes all the way into the arch of conflict in Africa, through the Mali, through the Central African Republic, from Somalia, all the way up, all the way down. So the wider Greater Middle East, I think, is a wider, the term wider actually says that, Middle East, of which in which the central geographical place is Israel. Moreover, and perhaps more important, of all the countries that compose this wider Greater Middle East, Israel is the only democracy. No other is a democracy. And again, Baruch Hashem, let's hope it continues to be so. I'm sure it will. I mean, the resilience of the political system in Israel, the way it resisted the elections with Bibi going down and then coming up again and then going down and coming up again, shows the resilience of a real democracy, which is, I salute Israel. I'm very proud of my ancestors coming from there too. Is that surprising for you? 30% of Portuguese people have a Jewish background, and I have a very proud Jewish background, and I can see some of the names there. They do too. So I'm very happy if I said yesterday, rather than Switzerland or Turkey, which are the other options on the table, Israel becomes the mediator. It'll give Israel international respect, status. The status is very important for Israel. Exactly, I would argue, I hope you would agree with me, Mr. Shapira, in relation to the 4 countries. You didn't mention 2 other countries with which you're bettering your relationships. Egypt, Turkey again, even though Erdogan is a complicated man, and his background is not very different from Hamas's background, and Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, Jordan, you already have a pretty good relationship with, even though the majority of the Jordan population is Palestinian in origin. I think they're behaving well. I'm incredibly happy. I think that one of the transformations, and I'm just dishing this out, one of the transformations that this Russian war invasion of Ukraine, one of the outcomes of this has been already a consolidation of NATO, a consolidation of the European Union, a recentering of the UN. They're becoming real actors in this. You mentioned this yourself when you said we're voted against Russia at the UN. The UN counts now, and I'm not saying this because the General Secretary is Portuguese. I'm saying this because I really believe it. NATO was never as united as it is now. I think because of the strategic importance of the Mediterranean, now that Russia is virtually controlling, if it gets Odessa, a Jewish city, by the way, the New York of the Black Sea, if Russia controls the Black Sea, and already Turkey is balking at that, because of course it does not like the idea that 2 other small NATO countries, 2 other NATO countries are very small, Romania and Bulgaria. I think NATO should grow to control the Mediterranean. And that growth, to my mind, is closing the Mediterranean at the Straits of Gibraltar by making Morocco an eventual member of NATO. And a security guarantee to Israel would be wonderful if Israel was given the status of a NATO member. I don't know if Israel would want that. I wish it would, because that's badly needed in a world that is going to change its epicenter. Russia already lost the public opinion game. I think Russia basically already lost the war. I don't think it will be able to get much traction in there. If it does, and I think, again, I'm speculating, if Putin continues losing, he's going to be slaughtered at home. He needs a win. My guess is he's going to go to Moldova, which is not good news. I actually wrote a book about another incursion that he did in 2008, which is going for Georgia. And in Georgia, he went to South Ossetia, where there was a provocation from Saakashvili. This is what was claimed. He was tricked into it. But he got not only South Ossetia, but he got Abkhazia as well. Abkhazia is on the coast, on the sea coast. So already they have, other than Mariupol, they have the Sea of Azov. They want to get the Black Sea. The Black Sea gives them access to the warm waters, and that's the Mediterranean. So closing the Mediterranean off for them would be a good idea, wouldn't it? So Morocco would be a wonderful member of, I'm speculating, but I think it's interesting speculation. So let me follow your steps and talk about the connections between Portugal and Israel. This is bound to increase. I do hope so. And it's bound to increase, among other things, because of what I used to call wrongly, and the second law of return, the acquisition of Portuguese nationality of those people who were unjustly, totally unjustly, either forced to convert, or had to flee, or were outright expelled after the time was, I think it is very sad that the Portuguese, when everyone was looking at the Ukrainian problem, I was very unhappy to see that law being revoked. Of course, but not retroactive. But my point is, there's 25,000 people in, and another 25,000 on the list who may be electable. Many of them come from Israel. Some of them are Donme, Sabatenians. You know what I mean, right? That means that the Jewish presence in Portugal, again, is going to be big. This is great news. I mean, as I tell my students, we're going to get 10 Nobel Prizes within 10 years. I mean, I'm not joking. I really believe this. This is wonderful news for a relationship between one corner of the Mediterranean, Portugal, which is actually outside the Mediterranean, but it was part of the Muslim Andalusia, which they think they have a right to. Again, historically, I have a doctoral student writing her doctorate on this. I'm supervising her doctorate on this. Whether there's a chance that there will, of course there isn't. I mean, both Portugal and Spain are NATO members. That an incursion or an attack here would be completely unacceptable. We're bound to have closer connections. I myself am building a connection to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. The Hebrew University was created in 1925. It's a fabulous university, much better than any Portuguese university. I'm trying to network with you guys. I don't know if, Ambassador, you come from the Hebrew University. You don't, but some of your predecessors as ambassadors to Portugal did. For the moment, that's all I would want to say. But I'll be very happy for this discussion to continue. It's not really a discussion. I'm fully supporting what the ambassador said.
Thank you. And thank you for the respect of the allotted time for each speaker too, I should add. I will now pass the floor to Professor João Caetano for his intervention.
Peter, it's of course, and also with Armando Marques Guedes, a friend of Israel. If we think about Portugal, in fact, a small country with good relations with most countries in the world, of course, with Israel as well. We have strong historical ties. It's a fact. And in common, many things, of course, cultural things, but also the size of the country. In fact, Israel has not so many people as Portugal, 80, I suppose 80.5 people, 22, I suppose, 1,000 kilometers squared, so a quarter of Portugal. Anyway, a strong nation in the world. And taking into account what you said, well, my question is, the first question, can we live together? And of course, this is a great test for Israel itself, because you, every day, you test yourselves in order to live together. But the idea that thinking about the concept of the greater Middle East, and you said in three main points the way your country contributes in order to enlarge the concept. Of course, the bad news, firstly, and the relations between Israel and Iran, and not only between Israel and Iran, but the world, the entire world and Iran. It's a big point to reflect every day, but also the good points, the good news you said, and even the third, it's not so positive, but it is also positive. And my point is, can we live together? And what can we do in order to cooperate, not only with Israel, but to the world? And you gave a good example, and like Armando, I also emphasize your point. You stressed the importance. You are Israel, a small country, but a big nation, as an effective point, an effective position about Ukraine, about the conflict. And you said, anyway, you are trying to be, the country tries to be a mediator. And in fact, it's not easy to be a mediator. And the world, because we know many countries, not only Turkey, but also France and other countries, well, the political leaders try to be mediators, and it's not easy. I don't know, well, maybe Israel will get the position or not, but anyway, Israel is in conditions in order to try to be the mediator, and the world needs mediators. If we think about the world, okay, we are a Portuguese university, a global university like ours. And every day we stress the importance of education. And of course, I cannot, our rector is here, and I know her efforts in order to enlarge the relations with other universities. And of course, we need to cooperate more, I would say, with Israel. It's amazing, it's fantastic, the investment Israel has in research and development concerning GDP. It's the greatest, the highest in the world. Okay. So I would say, I see here, and I'm sure that it's also your point, both Portugal and Israel must cooperate. But it's not only a question of cooperate two countries, but more countries, more people. And reflecting on education, we can say, okay, 2 months ago, maybe we were wrong. Maybe we were not aware of the world as it exists, but we thought the importance of education, there will not be a war. Anyway, now there is a war. And we are thinking maybe a new Cold War or coldest war, maybe. Anyway, we have people, we need to make our education our priority. And how can, and it's maybe a question, maybe you can afterwards to respond to it. How can we tackle with different objectives, like, okay, the war, we need to stop the war, but at the same time, to get what makes the people's lives better, okay? And the great challenge of education. I remember, I'm not an old man, but I remember the times when most Portuguese people could not study, could not, they had not access to, and Israel is strong, one of the aspects, of course, because it has a strong higher, not on higher, but education system, okay? And the point is, you know, many people all over the world like Israel, some other don't like, but one point is a fact. Israel not only is a nation, but is a great, strong player in the world. So, how can, if I ask you, well, many people, not only from Portugal, but from other continents, most of them probably Portuguese-speaking people, but not only Portuguese-speaking people, how can you explain the success of Israel as a nation, as a small nation that can survive? How can you? How do you see the relations with Portugal and with universities, and about the war? Still reinforcing the point of cooperation and the question, can we live together? What can we do together this time? In fact, maybe there is our world. Many people thought, or some people thought, it was a flat world without borders. Now we know, not only now, but of course, if we had doubts, President Putin said that borders are still important. And of course, for Israel, borders are still important. But even if we, the physical borders, the cultural borders, but anyway, how can we say, okay, we need to nations still exist, and it's a good exercise to say that, but how can we cooperate? And what do you think about the world after the war? Okay, I think the example you said is very interesting, because building a hospital in such difficult conditions, okay, many big countries cannot do that. Okay. Yes, of course. Yes, and humanity. Yeah, but maybe many people do not realize that the cause is here, okay? And we need a minimum of order. And it's my point, as a teacher, at the university, every day I think about that. What can I do in order to make the world a little bit better? And one final point, maybe there will be questions about that, but how can Israel still improve the relations with the neighbors? Many people we know, for ideological reasons and other reasons, are still afraid of Israeli politics because they are pro-Palestinians. And of course, I said, and this is an important point, Portugal, our diplomatic recent history, Portugal has good relations with the other countries. And we, as a peaceful country, we do wish to have a peaceful greater Middle East and a peaceful world. And what are your expectations about that? Good news. 4 countries, maybe not 4, but maybe 5 or 6, you are doing strong, good deals with them. But what will happen? Because I remember, I'm not an old man, but I remember in my life, okay, 30 years ago, war, it was, or 40 years ago, war was a problem in Europe, and afterwards, okay, it's better, but the problems still exist. And so this is my reflection. My point: education is very important for us, and it's important that the ambassador of Israel is present today in the youngest Portuguese public university. You asked about the building when you entered. Okay, it's an old building, but thank you also because the building interested you. It's history, and thank you for being here, and also to thank Armando, because I know he is not only loves Israel, but he is always is a man who knows many things, and I every day learn with him. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Relvão. As the moderator of this roundtable, I feel a bit surpassed by the course of the events, because the debate has already started in a way, and in more than just one occasion, there were already questions asked, especially to the ambassador of Israel here, of course. I would like to remind all those present, especially through Zoom connections, that to intervene, to present questions, please use the chat by writing, and of course also in the room, for those who wish to do so, please raise your hand. And for the moment, I would leave the floor to the ambassador of Israel, who's already asked specific questions.
Thank you. First of all, you make my life very easy. Everybody is so supportive, and that's always good. You know, the late Shimon Peres, our previous president, he said that the Middle East is divided to those countries which are oily land and the Holy Land. No, but being the Holy Land, if you don't have, it's not a natural resource. It's not something that you could use in order to buy and help your GDP. And that's why Israel had to find itself in the position that we have not having a natural resource and being under so many threats, we need to use our natural resource, which is our brain, because we didn't have any other option. And that's what happened in Israel. And that's why we became the startup nation. That's why we became a country that understands that, first of all, we need to find solutions. Could be technological solution, agriculture solutions, in order to assist the country, but also to assist the world and to create cooperation and contact with other countries. So I'll give you an example. A few months ago, there was this big conference in Glasgow about climate change. Israel was the second largest delegation to come to Glasgow. The second largest delegation. Like we have 193 countries around the world. I don't think we are size-wise, I don't think we are even in the first 100. And we sent the second largest delegation. The reason we did that, because the Prime Minister said, I'm going to Glasgow to talk about climate change. But it's not enough to talk about climate change. We need to talk about solutions. In order to talk about solution of climate change, let's bring the business community of Israel, all those startups who were dealing with cybersecurity and dealing with other stuff, to start hearing and discussing the problems that this world have about climate change, and start thinking about solution, technological solution, in order to solve the issues of climate change. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. So we did it with the water management. That's something that Israel, you know, when I was raised in Israel in the 70s and even in the 80s, we all the time, everybody spoke about that the next war in the Middle East will be about water. And we had to count every drop that came out of the water hose. Today, my children, they can use the bath as much as they want in Israel. We don't need to count the water drops that are coming out of the hose, because we have 4 desalination plants all over the coast of Israel. We are recycling almost more than 95% of our water. I understand that Portugal, almost all of your water for agriculture is fresh water. 99% of Israeli water for agriculture is recycled. There is no reason why not to do that. And I think that if we will work together, Israel and Portugal, you can use our knowledge and our experience in things and elements and issues and challenges that you're confronting right now. And we can use also your experience in many things. You know, you have lots of experience by being a country that most of your border is sea, which we can learn about it more of how to deal with that. And I think you hosting here the Ocean Conference in early July, that's a great example of the role of Portugal to the world in many of those issues and other stuff. I think we can do much more together in order to assist each other and to work together and to achieve a lot more than where we are right now. I'm a truly big believer of the cooperation and the potential between the countries that still can be achieved. I think we will open this to different questions and then I will answer others.
Thank you for your first intervention. Professor Armando Marques was about to say something, please.
I have a relative here with the same background as you do, Ambassador, and I do. Pedro Vaz Serra. Pedro, are you there? From the University of Coimbra. If Pedro Vaz Serra is there, I'd very much like Pedro to pose a question. I think people on the other side should pose a question.
This is a typically Portuguese moment when questions are not posed because nobody wants to be the first. But
You'll be the first.
Exactly, I was about to say that. The point just made about the use of water in agriculture for use of agricultural water in Portugal is a very relevant point because there is in fact a resistance and where we would not expect, which is in local municipalities, to use desalinized water. And this is something that from a logical, rational standpoint, it's very hard to understand. It has to do probably with ingrained interests on the field. But in some parts of Portugal, which are growing, it's a greater and greater concern every year. And that technology in which Israel excels for a long time, and it's known worldwide, is badly needed in Portugal. So that would be, in answer also to Professor Relvão Caetano's question, one of the prime fields of cooperation among the two countries. And not only that, but also a lesson, an experience of Israel to the Middle East in general, I would say as well. We don't have yet a question, but
I can make it few. At the level of security, and I'm talking about police, I'm talking about military, I'm talking about intelligence services. All of those Portuguese ones get training in Israel. That's one obvious area. Business is another obvious area. I'm not thinking about Abramovich here specifically, but that would be contentious. But that is, I think, a possibility, and a distinct possibility. Professor João Caetano mentioned this, and I mentioned this at the beginning, so did you, Ambassador Shapira, is at the level of education, university education. I did have a meeting together with José Ullman Carp, the president of the Lisbon community. The two of us were online about 3-4 weeks ago with friends of the Hebrew University of Israel, with the rector, and with an ambassador on the other side. And I was given the floor and asked for more university cooperation. Portuguese universities, Nova School of Law is my faculty. We have very few students. We have like 3,000 students. Hebrew University has 20,000 students. It's much bigger than we are. But then again, Nova has other faculties. The Faculty of Social and Human Sciences, where I was for 10 years, where I got a doctorate in anthropology, would you believe it, in social anthropology. That's the kind of thing we can do, network with your institutions and have exchanges of students. and have exchanges of professors circulating around. That's easy. I mean, there's an Erasmus Mundus thing that we can get involved with you in at no expense, because already we're paying for that. It's just a question of writing you in, and you would be coming in. And I would like to ask the ambassador if he thinks there's a potential there and any interest on your side for this.
Want me to answer? So yes, I think there is a lot of potential. I'm a true believer that universities is one of those areas that creates, the bond between the people and the next generation of leaders in almost every aspect you can think of. And that's why it's so important to create this contact between universities and to try and to bring more student exchange. I think it's very important. So I first of all, I congratulate you for working with the Hebrew University and trying to do that. And of course, we will try also from the embassy to assist as much as we can, because as I said, I think it's a great field to work on. I will say one word, which I didn't think of talking about it, but you've raised it as a slight comment, and I will refer to it regarding the Sephardic law. I'm not going to get into the Abramovich case because it's none of my.
It's none of our business at all.
And if there is an investigation that needs to take place, I think it's important that this investigation will take place and will come out with a result. And after it will come out with a result, we'll know better. But I want to say two things. First of all, it's important to mention that the Jewish community in Portugal is a very important, strong, and honest community. And even if, and I have no idea what happened, and as I said, this investigation needs to take place, but I think it's an important community, and it's important for Portugal that this community will continue to grow, and it will be a strong and a community that will be involved in the daily life of Portugal. So that's number one. Number two, I think the Sephardic law, it has nothing to do with Israel, although most of the people who receive this citizenship are Israelis, because it's the Jewish state, but it has nothing to do with Israel. It's a law that was decided by the government of Portugal. I think it was a very courage move by the Portuguese government to look at its past and to recognize its past, to recognize its sins of the past, and to accept and to decide about this law. Absolutely. So I congratulate, and I did it before, the government of Portugal for going ahead with this law. I think, by the way, that, again, I don't want to get into the numbers of how many already received this Portuguese citizenship and how many are in the process, but I think it's also a good thing for Portugal, and it's a good thing for the relations between Portugal and Israel. Today, the word Portugal is a very common word in Israel. Up until 10 years ago, it wasn't. And as of 3 years ago, we have direct flights between Tel Aviv and Lisbon. And as of this month, TAP and El Al are going to even increase the number of flights. And I can tell you that most of the flights are fully booked with Israeli tourists and Israeli business people coming to Portugal in order to, first of all, to know this country, to visit this country, and also to make business with this country. And that's something which I think the Sephardic law has a lot to do with. Unfortunately, by the way, we don't have enough Portuguese coming to visit Israel. And that's something that I need to change as an ambassador of Israel, because these flights, as I said, are fully booked with Israelis. I need them to be also fully booked with Portuguese. I think it's important that Portuguese people will know Israel not only from the religious point of view, but also from the fun point of view, and also from the business point of view, and many other things that Israel has to offer. So that's something, as I said before, I think it has a lot to do with the Sephardic law, and there is a lot of good elements that came with this law, and I hope that this difficult time that, first of all, the Jewish community here is confronting right now will pass very soon, and we'll be able to continue to work as we should together.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to say we have already 2 questions online. One is almost technical, maybe someone can answer about how to manage the byproducts of desalination of water. What is the experience? The other question, coming from Coimbra at your request, and addressed to you specifically, given your enormous experience, and I'm reading, what role Portuguese diplomacy can and should play in the Middle East?
Well, I think the red light means I'm on, right? I think it's up to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, of course. I think Portugal should tighten up its connections to Israel. I hope it will. The man who has been suggested will be the next Minister of Foreign Affairs, I remember many years ago, was the Secretary of State at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Ariel Sharon fell ill, and he asked for a minute of silence in respect of his illness, which was absolutely amazing. I was thrilled by the fact that he did this, particularly in relation to Ariel Sharon, which was a contentious persona, unfortunately now passed. I think the potential is huge. Pedro, and I'm addressing Pedro Vaz. I think the potential is huge. I have no idea what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is going to do. I do know that there was a mission at the time that I was at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to go and visit the Yad Vashem Museum, the Shoah, Holocaust Museum, which is awful to go to, but educational. One does learn. Why don't we set up a mechanism for school children to go and visit from Portugal over there, financed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Now that there are direct flights, and probably low-cost flights will show up, that will make it easy. I have 3 children living abroad, one in Norway, 2 in London, and they fly over to Portugal from London. Last week, one of them flew in for 30 euros, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, this is almost the money I pay for the taxi to take me to the airport. It's absurd we don't use this potential. Israel is not far away from us, not only geographically, but also, I always say this, and I think the ambassador will like to hear this, and I'm sure Pedro will like to know this. Israel is us over there in that part of the world. Let us not forget this. All European countries should be aware of this. The Americans are aware of this, the North Americans, the Canadians are aware of this. About time the Europeans wake up to this. Israel is the West over there in the greater Middle East. You have a political system similar to us. You have a legal system similar to us. You have a religion which is partaken by many of us, of which the majority, of course, are Christians, but of course, Jesus Christ was a Jew, wasn't he? With the Brit Milah and everything. Let's wake up to the realities of a new world which is emerging, in which Israel will be condemned to be our ally. It already is. We're on the same side, and will always be on the same side. That is an appeal. I don't know, Pedro, if this is what you wanted to hear. I'm sure it is what you wanted to hear, but I'm not sure if you want to pose any other questions or to the ambassador.
I should have. We have another question which ties in directly to what we were just saying concerning the sufficiency or not of the guarantees to sovereignty and integrity offered by, and I'm reading, protocols established between states and the UN. Are they sufficient or not, be it in the Great Middle East, but also elsewhere, to offer that security of sovereignty? And that is open to the entire table, by the way. It's not directed at anyone in particular.
The moment has never been better than this for the reasons His Excellency, the Ambassador, spelled out at the beginning, which is the quadruple alliances Israel has established in the last year with Arabic countries. Well, the Sudan is not an Arabic country, of course, but I get the point. When the State of Israel was created, it was via a UN decision. The legitimacy of the State of Israel is absolutely beyond the question. 10 countries voted against it, if I'm not wrong. All of them were from the Arab League. That is no longer the case, so let's use that opportunity. Ambassador, please.
No, I agree with you. And look, I'm a believer of multilateral diplomacy. I'm a diplomat. And I think the UN has an important role. But at the end of the day, the UN and let's take, for instance, what's going on in Geneva, not only in New York. They're wasting their time on, I don't want to say nonsense, but you know what? I will say nonsense in order not to say anti-Semitism. Because if in 2022, only a year ago, the UN passed 14 resolutions against Israel and 4 against the rest of the world, something is not right. And if the UN Human Rights Council passed 39 resolutions against Israel, 3 against Syria, which for the last 10 years is killing its own people. More than almost 500,000 people are dead in Syria. And only 1 against Iran, a country that doesn't give freedom of speech. If you want to be gay in Iran, let's try. They are hanging reporters. Only 1 resolution against Iran at the UN Human Rights Council and 39 against a democratic country. You know, we can criticize ourselves sometimes. Maybe we do things are wrong. We have a very good judicial system that investigate all of that. I'm not saying we are a saint, but we are a democratic country. 39 resolution against Israel in the UN Human Rights Council. It's more than 1/3. Something is wrong at the multilateral system in the world. So although I'm a great believer of working together and building bridges and building those coalitions of the right side in everything around the world, I think that the UN and its proxies needs to understand that instead of wasting their time and instead of playing in this ridiculous game that is led by pure anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, or whatever you want to call that, nothing will change. And I think it's the role of the democratic world. It's the role of it's a role of the EU. It's the role of Portugal to change it. And it can't be that Portugal is co-hosting the Durban conference at the UN a few months ago. It just can't be, because the Durban conference was voted even by other EU countries. Some of them are very good friends of you and us, like France and Germany and others, saying that it's a theater of anti-Semitism and we should not participate in that. So why is Portugal co-sponsoring it? So I think that at the end of the day, Portugal and other EU countries and other countries around the world need to choose a side and be on the right side of history, also when it comes to Israel. And I think supporting Israel, it's the right thing to do. It's supporting democratic world, it's supporting the Western world, it's supporting the right values that you believe in and that the Western world is believing. And something needs to be changed in the multilateral system of the world.
Thank you, Excellency. I don't want to interrupt anyone else on the table, just to pass to the table, because it's not addressed to anyone either in particular. Another question, which is from someone who has already been in Israel, a Portuguese, who has traveled to Israel in work and was very impressed with the knowledge about Portugal, particularly with regard to the agricultural and agro-food sector, and asks how come this knowledge is available in Israel about Portugal, although I think we have something of an answer about this because of our historical connections.
No, it's more than that. The trade between Israel and Portugal is around $450 million a year, both sides. It's mainly based on agriculture, and that's why I think it has to do also with that. And by the way, that's why we need to change it also a little bit to bring more stuff to the table, which I think will change the numbers. And once the number will change, I think it will increase also the political relations between the countries, because it's all connected, and also the peer-to-peer connections between the countries. So we need to keep working on the agriculture, but to add also other elements to the economic relations between the countries.
I have much more to say. I feel there is a consensus. I feel exactly the same way. One of my daughters actually interned at the UN in Geneva at the Council of Human Rights, and the Council of Human Rights was a masquerade. I mean, who were the members of the Council of Human Rights when she interned? It was China, it was Iran, it was North Korea, it was Venezuela, it was Cuba. You must be kidding. I mean, this is, by the way, the votes now, the 2% of the votes at the UN General Assembly, pro-Russia, only 2% voted for Russia. A lot of people abstained. A lot of people abstained from even going and voting. 120 states, so the 195, I think it is. You said 93, maybe I'm wrong. 120 voted against Russia. The world is shifting. And the ones that voted for Russia, none of them was, that I know, an Arabic country. So the tide is changing. Even the UN is changing. There was never this much unity as the UN, as I said at the beginning. So let's hope this absurdity stops, that it stops being a machine to produce anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli, because they mix the two things, right? Which are very different things, anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli stances, but they make a point to try and make it sound. It's the canary in the mine, isn't it? Once anti-Semitism shows up, it's very hard to stop. I don't even want it to begin. In Portugal, it doesn't exist. I think this is one of the reasons given to me by the community, by so many people at the community are absorbed into Portugal and leave the community because they don't feel any resistance and any anti-Semitism. Not that there isn't any, but that there isn't much, that there isn't sufficient anti-Semitism. I'm in no way defending anti-Semitism. I think it's absolutely abhorrent. My mother, were she to be alive, would kill me. She knew that I would make any comment like that. I think I've made my point.
Thank you. Professor Relvão Caetano.
Just a few words. Of course, we all believe, we all know that Israel is a democracy. And in fact, I do think that in Portugal, there is not, and I do agree with Armando, there is not an anti-Semitism feeling for many reasons, for many historical and cultural reasons. Anyway, I remember I was a child, but 40 years ago, well, a little bit more, the Portuguese foreign minister, the Portuguese Minister for Foreign Affairs, Diogo Freitas do Amaral, said about the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. And he said, I still remember, okay, we need to realize that the Palestinians have also the right to a country. And I think this is the main problem. Anyway, I know, I remember since the first agreements between Egypt and Israel, many things happened after that. And I do believe, I'm a believer as well, like you, that this is the way. Nowadays, there are more Arabic countries who support the idea of the
Are you
country.
defending the Balfour Declaration and the two-state solution?
Sorry?
Are you defending the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine in that area? Is that the
Are
point
you
you're
asking
making?
me?
Yes.
Yes, I defend that idea. I think the world needs we need conditions to create a permanent solution. Of course, I do defend the right of Israel to be a country, and of course, but
you know, and I will tell you, and it will connect to that what I said at the beginning about the Palestinians. There was a poll in the Palestinian side and in the Israeli side a few years ago. They asked them, do you believe in the two-state solution? Around 75% of the Israelis and the Palestinians said yes, but they believe in that. And then they asked another question, do you believe it will happen? And it was exactly the same numbers in both sides said no.
yeah.
And that takes me back to the point that I said before. Right now, we need to concentrate on building back the trust, go step by step. Let's put aside for a moment all those, you know, conferences and with everybody that is coming to try and solve the problem. And let's just concentrate on building the steps by steps of the trust between the two people. Because at the end of the day, the regular Palestinian person wakes up in the morning, doesn't care about Israel, doesn't care about anything. He cares about how he comes back home at evening and bring food to his people. And we need to assist and to connect to those people in order to make sure that their life will get better and the trust between the two people will come back and will be rebuilt in order to get to the point that now we can sit together and discuss if the bridge or the road between Israel and Ramallah will come from here or will come from there. Let's put all of that aside. Now we should talk only about how we build back the trust between the two sides. And I think that's what we need to concentrate right now on.
6 months ago, maybe a little more, we lose track of time with COVID, maybe 8 months ago. The top thing in Netflix in Portugal was Justiça. Yeah, isn't that amazing? I mean, the top one, the number one.
We have now seemed to reach a stall in terms of questions online.
So I would say just two more comments to things that were said before. First of all, when I went over the main points of the Middle East that I talked about, I didn't mention two countries just because we didn't have time for that, but it's important to mention Jordan and Egypt. At the end of the day, the peace agreement that Israel was able to achieve with Egypt and then with Jordan, with Egypt in 1979 and with Jordan in 1993, those are probably the most important peace agreement that Israel achieved. And it's something that was critical because it was with two countries that we had wars, very brutal wars with, and the ability for the leaders to go ahead and to put aside all the history and all the conflict and to sign those peace agreements, I think that's remarkable. And our relations with Egypt and with Jordan are extremely important. And I'm very happy that, you know, sitting here almost 40 years later, they're still on. And only today, my prime minister went to Sharm el-Sheikh to meet with the Egyptian president. So it shows you that they are very important and going on. And I think it's important to mention them as well, with all the respect to the other peace agreement that Israel was able to achieve in the last year around the region. No, that's it.
Which should suggest creating good relationships. I think it's easy with someone who's now here, the Ismailites, the Aga Khan. They're friends of both Israel and Portugal. And they're sieged here in Portugal now.
And they are also, I should add, frequent visitors to this cycle of conferences because they are very interested in international affairs and the integration of Portugal in the world system. very unusually for Portugal, we are ahead of schedule. And also very unusual, we had a significant debate, which in Portugal is not usually the case. And for the last time, if there is any question online or in the room that someone wishes to present, please do so now. If not, I will thank again all the participants for taking place in this roundtable. And I will bring it to an end at this point. Thank you very much again, all of you. Thank you. Thank you.